Kazuma was a Rizzless fool who had died in the most comically pathetic way ever. However, he was given the chance to reincarnate into a world of magic by a goddess, whom he made sure to take along with him. Now he's trying to make a name for himself as a broke-ass adventurer with a useless goddess while he gathers a harem of weird-ass girls to help him complete the task of defeating the Demon King. One evening, Kazuma was at the guild writing a letter to his parents about his recent adventures and how he was going to be a proud baby daddy even though he had as much Riz as an ostrich. The next moment, some of the female guild members recognized him as the guy who defeated one of the Devil King's generals, so they flocked to him. The girls began screaming their heads off like they were at a Harry Styles concert when he told them there was plenty of him to go around. While they crowded around him, he tried to get them to settle down until he felt the softest, bounciest plots against his back. Now, being the cultured fool that he was, Kazuma leaned into it a bit, but the owner of the milkshakes had other plans because she began thrusting her hips forward. Kazuma calmly told her to cut it out, but that only made her go harder, so he screamed, saying he wasn't a cheap-ass man who smashed without going on a date. The moment the lady told him she was doing it because she liked him, Kazuma realized he was being held by Sylvia, which made him cry out in fear. Fortunately, he woke up the next moment screaming like a crazy person, but glad it was all a dream. The next morning, Aqua asked Megumin if she'd seen the bottles of wine they had received as souvenirs from the Crimson Demon Village, and Lalatina, who was drinking coffee at the table, told her that she'd found the bottles empty, so she'd thrown them out. Aqua thought it weird that they were finished, as she had no memory of drinking them, so she asked Kazuma if he'd drank them. However, Kazuma was too busy trying to perfect his mysterious bad boy pose, so he didn't respond to her question. Aqua walked over to him and repeated her question, but the stupid idiot began staring at the rising sun as though he were on the set of a cringe romance movie and began talking nonsense about the wind. This made Lalatina voice her concern about his mental health, but Megumin assured her that he was at that stage in his life where being delusional was the only way forward. Suddenly, Kazuma screamed and grabbed hold of his hair, scaring Aqua, so she told him not to worry about the wine, but Kazuma turned to her and asked what she was talking about. Later in the day, the four of them went to the guild's restaurant to stuff their faces with food and attempt to drink themselves to death. After eating, Kazuma told the girls that he was going to become a monk, which surprised them. Nevertheless, Aqua advised him to join her order, but Kazuma told her he'd rather make out with Shriek than do so. Lalatina then asked why he suddenly wanted to become a monk, so he explained that he had once believed he was in his popular arc when Yun said she wanted to be his baby mama, and after he'd slept in the same bed as Megumin. However, he was still a pathetic virgin who was nearly forced to make plot with some ugly orcs and had gotten PTSD when he committed a lover suicide with a chimera. He told them that after going through all of the traumatic experiences, he had concluded that he was going to die without getting laid. Aqua then hugged him, saying she would share some words of wisdom to lift his spirit, but the bird-brained idiot started talking about her stupid order, which only made him mad. He immediately got up from his chair and said he was switching jobs from adventuring to monkhood. He then went to the receptionist and asked her to give him directions to the nearest temple, which she did. Before he ran out of the guild, he confessed to the receptionist that he had once had a crush on her. Soon after, Kazuma began his journey to the temple with the girls right behind him, and Lalatina trying to convince him not to do it. Aqua told her to let him be, as his inability to commit to things was the inspiration behind Central C's commitment issues. She said that by nightfall he'd be looking for the nearest bottle of booze so he could outdrink Zoro in a drinking contest. Kazuma heard what she said and told her to shut up, which only led to the two fools bickering like siblings. As Megumin watched them argue, she remembered how Kazuma had stood by her when she was trying to master her magic. When she snapped out of it, she heard Kazuma tell Aqua that his resolve was as strong as the mountain next to them. Aqua immediately burst out laughing and told him not to delude himself into thinking he was the Avatar or something. Lalatina tried to beg them to stop behaving like spoiled brats, but they refused to listen until Megumin tried to include herself in the conversation. Kazuma immediately told her that he didn't want advice from a surfboard loli with no curves. Enraged by his words, Megumin said she would blow his resolve sky high just to prove that it was as useless as his sausage. Immediately, she activated her magic and blew up the mountain, so they had to spend the night there as no one was willing to carry her the rest of the way. As they sat around the fire, Kazuma complained about Megumin's recklessness, but stopped when he heard Sylvia's ghost talking to him. Lalatina then asked if he was okay keeping watch while they slept, and he assured her that he was because at home he hardly got any sleep. Megumin asked why it was so, and he explained that he usually spent the night raiding dungeons and slaying monsters with his friends. Lalatina and Megumin were impressed by this, but Aqua told him to explain that all of that happened in his video games. Later on, while Lalatina and Aqua were fast asleep, Megumin asked Kazuma if he wanted to return home someday. He told her that even if he wanted to, there was no way it would happen. So she asked what his parents would say if they ever found out he wanted to end their bloodline by becoming a monk. Kazuma told her to mind her business, but she cut him off by saying he had helped her maintain her connection to her explosion magic. She told him that she hoped to one day show him a perfect explosion of 200 points, which made him say living with them wasn't a bad thing. When she reminded him that they were yet to receive their reward for saving the Crimson Demon Village, Kazuma said it wouldn't be a bad idea to hold off on his dreams of becoming a monk. Megumin told him that she liked how their lives were and wouldn't like to chance their occasional brushes with death for anything. But Kazuma only looked at her like she'd gone cuckoo because he'd very much like to stay alive. The next moment she placed her hand on his and continued speaking, but stupid Kazuma didn't hear a word of what she was saying because he began freaking out. By the time he convinced himself that it was a harmless touch and turned to face her, she was already fast asleep. The next day, they continued on their journey to the temple but stopped when they came across an injured girl. Aqua tried to go to her, but Kazuma stopped her, saying she was a monster in disguise since his monster detection abilities were going crazy. However, Aqua and the other girls insisted on helping the injured girl even though Kazuma read through the guild's monster book and told them that she was dangerous. Before he could stop them, they ran to her and Aqua tried healing her until she realized her bandages weren't real. Kazuma pulled out his knife and tried explaining that the girl was the type of monster that lured its victims by acting vulnerable. When the girls noticed the knife, they tried to stop Kazuma from harming the girl. However, the girl began speaking and asked if Kazuma was going to slay her, which made him hesitate as he began wondering if he was doing the right thing. Aqua then took the chance to give him some words of wisdom about how if he was having second thoughts, he didn't have to go through with it. The monster girl then apologized for being a monster and said that it was the first time she had spoken to humans. After she told them that if she were to be born again, she hoped she'd be a normal girl, Kazuma changed his mind. As the group continued their journey to the temple, Kazuma suddenly stopped, but Aqua thought it was because he had a stomachache, so she offered him some toilet paper. Kazuma told her that was not the case and said he'd forgotten something, so he ran back in the direction of the monster girl. As he ran, he made up his mind to bring her food every day if he could pull off a talk no jutsu and convince her not to eat people. Upon reaching there, he noticed the girl acting strangely, so he hid behind some bushes and watched her. The girl, who had no idea she was being watched, complained about how she lost some good food and wondered if it was because of how she'd spoken. Kazuma kept watching her as she practiced her lines and cackled like a witch, but he didn't do anything until she pulled out her last victim from the earth. When she noticed him watching her, she begged him to pretend that he hadn't heard anything, but Kazuma had other ideas. When he finally returned to the girls, he was acting strangely and told them it was time to return home. Dumbass Aqua still thought he'd gone to take a dump and asked how he'd wiped his butt with no toilet paper. Kazuma told her that wasn't the case, but she ignored his words when she laid eyes on a mallet attached to his luggage. Aqua asked where he had gotten it, and he told her it was on a body he'd buried earlier. However, she felt she'd seen it before and tried to get a closer look. But Kazuma refused to let her take it, and the two ended up struggling for it. Just then, some gold coins fell out of it, and that's when they realized that it was a magic mallet. Immediately, the gold-digging bunch agreed to return home because they had finally hit the jackpot. As they made their way into the city, Kazuma was so pleased with himself that even Saliva's ghost wasn't enough to make him feel bad. Aqua then asked if he could buy her some wine, and he told her that he'd buy her whatever she wanted since he was loaded now. Their conversation was interrupted by Chris, who asked why they were so bubbly. Lalatina told her it was because they were on their way to celebrate Kazuma's return, and asked if she'd like to join them. Chris declined their invitation and said she had something important to do, so she bid them farewell and ran off. After she left, Megumin asked Kazuma if he'd buy her a new robe, and he said he would before reaching into his cape to retrieve the mallet. However, he couldn't find it as it had been swiped by Chris, which made him scream. Later that night, Kazuma lay on the floor sulking, and Megumin told him to cheer up as it wasn't the end of the world. Aqua then pulled up with a bottle of wine and laid down on her futon to sleep after she said Kazuma was back to being a broke-ass loser. However, before she could drift off to La La Land, a knock sounded at the door, and almost immediately, she and Kazuma went outside to attack the poor, unsuspecting fellow. In the end, Lalatina gave them matching bumps on the head because the man they attacked was her family butler. When she asked why he had come, he said that her only asset was in danger, making Kazuma ask if her plots were going to be reduced since her jugs were the only assets she had. The butler said that wasn't the case before handing Lalatina a letter with the royal seal on it to read. After reading the letter, Lalatina began acting strangely, so Kazuma demanded she hand over the letter to him, but she refused, saying it had nothing to do with him. Kazuma ignored her words and used his steal ability to take it from her, after which he read it out loud for the others to hear. From the letter, they learned that Iris, the first princess, was inviting Kazuma for dinner so he could tell her about his heroic exploits. Lalatina tried to convince him not to accept it, but he and the other two idiots decided it was their turn to join the big league. The following morning, Kazuma was sitting in the living room with the letter in his hand, wondering if he would gain favor with the princess, when he was disturbed by Lalatina, who was dressed in a maid's outfit. She tried to beg Kazuma to change his mind about agreeing to an audience with the princess. Kazuma told her to zip it and said some very colorful things, which of course made the delusional masochist squirm in happiness. Later that day, Kazuma, Lalatina, Aqua, and Megumin went into town to visit Wiz at her shop. At the shop, she showed them the new lighters which Kazuma designed, that had just been delivered and was about to go on sale. While Megumin and Lalatina gushed over the new lighters like little kids on Christmas morning, Aqua ignored them as she stuffed her face with biscuits. They then asked Kazuma if they could have one each, and he left them. However, by the time Aqua was done with her snack, she asked why they were so excited over some stupid lighters. Nevertheless, she tried to take one for herself, but Lazuma slapped her hand away, saying she had to pay. He said Megumin had helped him build a prototype, and Lalatina had used her connections to hook him up with a rich merchant. But she, the Queen of Drunks, had spent all her time sleeping after drinking all the booze they had at home. She immediately got up, opened the door, and then turned around to face them. She told him that he was being a stingy old goat and said he was being unfair to her after she'd kept her mouth shut about how often he sniffed their unwashed laundry like a degenerate sock addict. As soon as she spilled the tea, the girls looked at him in shock, but Kazuma had the most shocked expression on his face. Later on, a small crowd gathered outside the shop to watch Aqua put on a magic show, feeling very much like Chris Angel. After she released some doves, the people began throwing coins at her, demanding she did more tricks. Aqua insisted she wasn't doing it for the money, when the truth was that she was the most underprivileged dirt-poor goddess on the block. Just then, Veneer showed up and began accusing her of obstructing his business after she'd sprayed holy water on the street and the doorknob of his store. Aqua told him she had every right to do what she liked on the streets. She pointed out that the streets belonged to everyone, so he couldn't tell her not to stand there. As they continued their argument, Wiz ran out the door and informed the people that the store had new products they would love. A few moments later, while Lalatina held Aqua back, the crowd lined up and began buying the lighters. Veneer then let out a loud laugh and said Kazuma couldn't have done it if he hadn't been motivated by him, but Kazuma argued that he had nothing to do with him. He even snapped at poor Megumin, who told him to stop letting the words of some self-absorbed demon get to him. The next moment, Veneer tapped on his shoulder to get his attention and offered him a completely black replica of his mask. Kazuma asked what it was for, and Veneer explained that once he put it on, he'd become a plot machine in the bedroom. When evening came, they were already back at their house, and Kazuma was dressed in his Sunday best and for the first time in his life, didn't look like a worthless bum. Aqua and Megumin, who were with him, assured him that they would do their best to make sure the dinner with the princess went smoothly. However, the plans they had to entertain the princess made Kazuma a little worried about everyone's safety, but he couldn't dwell on it as Lalatina walked in at that moment. When they turned to look at her, they were surprised to see their friend resembled a proper lady. A while later, Kazuma was sitting outside Laltina's room, waiting impatiently for the girls to get ready. Inside the room, Aqua asked for new clothes and complained as the clothes Lalatina had given to her were too big to accommodate her mid-sized melons. Just as Lalatina told her she didn't own something smaller, they heard Megumin sigh, so they turned to face her and asked what the problem was. She then let go of the dress she was wearing and it slid down to the floor. Lalatina was surprised by this and pointed out that she had worn that dress as a child, which made Megumin jump her as she felt Lalatina was mocking her for being built like an undeveloped child. Eventually, they came out of the room, and both girls had already found clothes to fit them, which seemed to leave Kazuma speechless for all the wrong reasons. Lalatina then reminded them to behave like civilized people, as rude comments could make them lose their heads. When she noticed Kazuma looked deep in thought, she asked what the matter was, and the idiot dumbass asked them to be prepared in case he had to move to the capital. He said if he managed to wow the princess, she might request he be closer to her. But Lalatina didn't share his feelings as she told him to snap out of his delusional dreams. They then made their way to the dining room, but before they went in, Lalatina reminded them to behave themselves and allow her to do her thing. After they walked into the room, Lalatina apologized to Iris for making her wait. She then introduced Kazuma and the others to her, after which she asked them to introduce themselves to the princess. Aqua went first, and after she introduced herself like a normal person, tried to do a magic trick to wow the princess. Lalatina grabbed hold of her immediately as she tried to stop her stupid parlor tricks. Megumin then stepped up and began screaming like a crazy person, so Lalatina had to wrestle both her and Aqua to stop them. This allowed Kazuma to continue with his stupid thoughts until one of the princess's guards told him to lower his gaze as he was in the presence of royalty. This seemed to shatter the illusion that the princess was a sweet young girl, so the half-brained dummy demanded a new princess. Lalatina grabbed him immediately and began scolding him, but he defended himself, saying the princess was a bratty snob. Before he could keep talking, they heard Aqua's voice, so they turned to see what she was doing. It turned out that she had snuck away from Lalatina to draw a sand portrait of the princess. However, before she could hand it over, Lalatina grabbed her, which caused her to let go of the paper. In the end, it floated down in front of Iris, and after she whispered into the ear of her guard, the guard informed them that she was willing to overlook their rudeness, as she liked the drawing. After they sat down for dinner, the guard, whose name was Claire, on behalf of the princess, asked Kazuma to tell them tales of his adventures. This gave the story weaver the opportunity to tell them his ripped-off version of the battles he'd won. His adventure tales wowed them so much that they asked what he did before he became an adventurer. Since he couldn't admit that he didn't have a job, he made up a story about how he defended his home and never got recognition for it. His audience believed his story, and Claire even asked to see his adventurer card. At the mention of his card, Kazuma spat his wine out because he couldn't let them see the kind of skills he had. Lalatina then came to his rescue and informed them that he was ashamed of showing the card because he was ranked very low. This made Claire ask if he'd really been the one to defeat Sir Mitsurugi and take his cursed sword for himself. Kazuma kept quiet as he didn't know how to explain that he'd used his steel skill to defeat Mitsurugi and take the sword. Iris then pulled on Claire's clothes and whispered into her ear when she turned to her. When Claire straightened, she told them that the princess believed Kazuma to be a liar, which made him pop off and start speaking to her rudely. Claire pulled out her sword and told him to watch his tongue, else he'd lose it. Lalatina got between them and apologized for his rudeness, after which she asked Iris to overlook the incident for her sake. Iris accepted her request, but demanded that Kazuma be gone from her presence, so they turned to leave. However, they noticed Megumin trying to go back and pick a fight, but she stopped and said she didn't want Lalatina to get in trouble. This made Lalatina smile, so she approached Iris and asked her to take her words back and apologize to Kazuma. Iris refused, saying that if he couldn't say how he defeated Mitsurugi, then it was proof that he was a liar. Before she could finish her statement, Lalatina gave her a dirty slap, which shocked everyone and made Claire draw her sword. Iris tried to stop her, but Lalatina had used her arm as a shield and had gotten herself hurt. Iris began apologizing, but Lalatina assured her that she was okay and continued her campaign for Kazuma's sake. Seeing Lalatina put herself in harm's way made Kazuma agree to demonstrate how she defeated Mitsurugi. However, since he was a dirty-minded little shit, he ended up using his steal ability to steal Claire's underwear instead of her sword. After the issue had been resolved, Iris apologized to Kazuma for calling him a liar and told him she'd love to hear more tales of his adventures. Kazuma promised to tell her more about them when he had the time, after which they all went outside to see the princess off. They all said their goodbyes, and as Claire and the other guard began saying the teleportation spell, Iris grabbed Kazuma's hand. The next moment, he found himself in the capital, and when Claire asked Iris why she had brought him, she reminded them that he promised her stories. My fellow Rizzlers, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click on this next one right here and keep on laughing.